When I first got into business, people were always saying, they're like, how do you knock on that many doors? Or how do you call so many strangers? I'm like, they're not ever going to hit me. Like, worst case scenario, I'm never getting touched. I'm getting told no. That is it.
Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Remington Ramsey, and today my guest is none other than Tim Stout in Atlanta real estate. Tim, how you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that we are, on a computer miles away. You're very intimidating. Tim's background is in MMA fighting. I think you said you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and you've thrown a couple punches in your day too.
Yeah, boxing was my forte. It was the first thing that I did, then in kickboxing.
All right. So today we're going to talk about what fighting has taught you and how it prepared you for the crazy game of real estate, and how the successes and the failures have prepared you. Like I said, you're a big reader. I see a lot of books in the background. It looks like you said you've read around 400 or 500 books on personal growth. Yeah,
about the last 10 years. I am obsessed with personal development.
What's been one of your most recent reads that you really enjoyed?
My coach, David Kesey, wrote Find a Way. That's a big one. He was a professional baseball player. So it's from the aspect of how he does it and how his mindset had to overcome things. Really good. I'm reading Endure right now, which is that's a really good one. That's a hardcore mental thing.
Do you feel like sports in general is a good way to prepare for the business world?
If you are competitive, it's the best way, I think.
I know a lot of people say that, sports is what kept them off the streets. And I can totally see that. I mean, obviously we know the things that comes from sports, the teamwork and the determination. What would you say fighting prepared you most for in this crazy game of real estate?
That you didn't have to be the most talented or the most gifted. You just had to be the hardest worker to win. When I got into fighting and in real estate, I wasn't the most talented. I wasn't the most gifted. I'm not a natural salesperson. I was just able to come in and work harder than everybody else. I was able to work harder at learning scripts, learning dialogues, learning objection handling, learning what to say, when to say it, how to say it. And I was just obsessed with it. And then it just becomes who you are, just like fighting does.
Do you feel blessed that you can wake up in an industry and the worst thing that happens is someone doesn't buy a house from you instead of punch you in the face?
When I first got into business, people were always saying, they're like, how do you knock on that many doors? Or how do you call so many strangers? I'm like, they're not ever going to hit me. Like, worst case scenario, I'm never getting touched. I'm getting told no. That is it. So when you're worried about your teeth in your head and then you're worried about somebody hurting your feelings, that's a big gap. So it was easy to walk across that.
Speaking of teeth, you mentioned that your front four teeth got knocked out in a fight. Was that before or after you were married?
That was before. One of my first, on my first date, like I pulled my teeth out to eat because I kept them. Now they're permanent, okay. But they were snapping in and out. A test to see, how people react. And
you didn't tell her. You didn't tell her. Did she know you were a fighter?
She did. She did. But she didn't know at what level. She didn't know that I was a professional. She just knew that I fought. But
that told her what level real fast.
Well, or I got beat up a lot. So,
so you took 26 fights, 16-10, and what I love about the opportunity to talk to you today is you had 10 losses, and I'm wondering what you learned in those losses. And how they prepared you for the wins, because you started off your career with 3 knockouts. In fact, I believe you said they were under 16 seconds, all 3 of them. Mm-hmm. So what I do know about fighting, though, is when you first get into amateur or professional, they don't really know much about you. So they're putting you up against someone else. Like if you're 2 new fighters, they don't really know what's going to happen. And they can, the more consistently someone watches you fight, they can pair you up with someone who's like skilled and training, but anything can happen. Do you feel like those first 3 fights, the knockouts were coming because they didn't know how to rank you?
Yes. I think they were able to stand in front of their sparring partners and other people they fought and they didn't fight anyone like me. I mean, once people figured out how to fight me, it wasn't as bad on them, but you don't fight me by standing in front of me. And I'm a bull. Like you're going to get the horn, and I can take a beating, and I've took several, but I'm going to try my best to give you the horn the entire time. And so people realized, after watching those first several fights, they're like, well, I'm just going to stay away from him.
Man, it's funny you say that. I broke my wrist and last year, and all I was able to do is watch movies. So I started watching franchises. I went through all the Rockies, which I hadn't watched since I was a kid.
Amazing.
And they are amazing. And what's amazing about it is Rocky was not the best fighter, hardly ever. What people loved about him is the beating he would take and still stand up. And I think he even says that in his latest movie.
Wouldn't quit. He wouldn't quit.
I mean, some people put him up, he's a fictional character, and some people put him as some of their favorite boxers. I mean, they're just, oh man. So, okay. So your first three fights, knockouts. And then you have, your fourth fight. Was that a win, or was that your first loss?
First loss. Yep.
So what happened there?
And that was a big one, because I was, beating everyone, and these were good fighters. They weren't bums. And then you believe your own hype, but then it's like one of my biggest lessons in life come from this fight. And I fought up a weight class. It's like, hey Tim, we have this guy. He's heavier than you. He's doing the same thing to people you are. Do you want to fight him? And I didn't say no to anybody. Like I said yes. Who is it? Like I always wanted to fight. And this fight was against Andy Foster. Andy Foster is actually the athletic commissioner for California now, so he's a big deal in the world. Sure. And he come in, and I remember hitting him right off the bat with the same punch that I knocked everybody else out with,
which is what?
Just overhand right. Like I jabbed, I get your hands coming in tight. Yeah, then I come over and I was creaming people with it. And I hit him, and he just backed up. I remember looking back at my corner, and my manager, Casey, he's just like, I hit him again, and he just shook his head. And then he ended up getting a hold of me and submitting me. And it's just like, and that was a big lesson. And not only because of the loss, but I remember calling my dad, because my mom wouldn't watch the fights, but they couldn't go to sleep until I told them how the fight went, make sure I was okay. And I always fought, it was the main event. So it was like right at midnight when I fought. She had to fight before midnight. And we're usually fighting in these bars and stuff. And I remember calling him. I was like, hey, Dad. He goes, and I didn't have to say anything. He goes, it's okay. I was like, what's okay? He said, losing's okay. And I was like, how'd you know I lost? He goes, I can just tell. He goes, Tim, if it wasn't for losing, you'd never know what it felt like to win.
Wow.
And I was just like, and that was huge for me. So, and I was like, okay, if I can't upset my dad, if I can't let him down, and I'll win, if I learn every time that I lose, it's just a win-win.
So let me ask you something. You knew going into fighting that you had the potential of losing right from the first one, but then did winning 3 in a row so soundly screw up your expectations?
Yeah. I just fell in my own hype. I mean, everybody's like, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're knocking out everybody, you're doing this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty badass. I'm pretty great.
Started believing
it.
And
then, yeah. But then every time that happened in my career, I met Mr. Humble, man, and he'd do it every time.
So how did you respond in fights 5, 6, and 7?
I would win. Usually I'd win 2 or 3, then I'd lose 1. And usually it's the same thing. I'd beat 2 or 3 really good guys, hard fought fights. And then I'd get to believe in my own hype. I would slow down. I would take a fight that wasn't good for me too fast. I remember I fought a kid out of Florida because one of my training partners backed out of it. And my manager is up a weight class, and I fought 170 and 185. And he goes, Tim, I got to fight. He goes, this so-and-so backed out. Do you want it? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. I don't care. And we got doing the research. This guy's like an NCAA wrestling champion. And like at that time, I had dealt with high school wrestlers, low-level college wrestlers. Sure. I mean, I was able to shut him down. With my hands, sprawls, everything. And then this guy comes in and just, you can't stop it. He's a wrecking machine. To pick me up over his head, drop me on my head, over and over and over. It's just like, there's nothing you could do. And at that fight, I was like, there are so many different levels to this.
Yeah.
And this guy is a different level when it comes to the wrestling.
Yeah. But how long did it take you to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu?
20 years.
20 years. Wow.
Average is 12 to 15. Some people's done it quick as 10. I'm very hard-headed. I've always been naturally strong and naturally fast. And with those three combinations, I didn't have to listen as much as I needed to in my mind. Oh, I can do this. I can do that. And you can't. And once I retired from fighting and really focused on grappling, I realized the true discipline and the true art of it. And that's when I was able to receive my black belt.
What kept you from getting it in that time was you believed you had it all together. You didn't feel like you needed to do whatever others did to succeed.
A lot of that. And I wouldn't spend enough time in the gi, the gi with the belt. I was always shorts and t-shirt kind of guy. And the gi is the jiu-jitsu. No gi without it is more of like submission wrestling.
Right.
And I didn't want to commit to it. And then once I retired, I decided I was done getting hit. Like I've sparred 3 times in the last 10 years. And every time that I spar, it's somebody who needs it kicked, but I don't have anybody in my gym to do it. And so I just glove up and do it.
Why is that? What you mentioned, so you don't want to get hit anymore. Why? I mean, obviously no one wants to get hit, but for years it didn't bother you. Now you decided you don't want to get hit. What is that?
As a kid, I probably started fighting at like 7, like at karate. Did high level karate. Then I got into boxing. I went high level boxing, and then I went high level professional MMA. And that's a lot of hits. And like we spar hard, we fight hard. And I think I watched Concussion with I think it's Will Smith. Mm-hmm. And then I started thinking of like, my memory is not that great. Like this is happening. This is a lot of things like we're adding up. And I'm like, I'm done getting hit. Like I'm done. I still train it. I still box. I kickbox. I coach. But grappling is what I do. Like if somebody confronted me in the street, I'm going hands on immediately. But jiu-jitsu is what I practice because I don't have to get hit.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, you mentioned in the pre-show that you had a couple of submission wins, and you didn't feel like they were wins. Can you talk about why that is?
Yeah, I remember my first one was a rear naked choke, and I remember getting it, and I got up and they raised my hand, and it was nothing compared to the feeling of knocking someone unconscious or the ref physically pulling me off of people. And I think it was because they had a choice in giving up. And I think it's a much more distinct, clearer victory if they have no choice in it. If they go to sleep, if the ref physically pulls me off of them. And in my mind, and that's what I was known for. So that was probably a lot of ego too, that I wanted to continue that. And yeah, it didn't feel near as good doing the submissions.
Well,
not at all.
So when I was in college, I trained for 3 years, and I took one Muay Thai fight. It wasn't mixed. It was just Muay Thai. Full disclosure, and this is how I know that they don't really know how to rank you, especially at amateurs, because I didn't have any idea who this guy was. He looked like he was 40 pounds heavier than me. And we got in there, and I ended up winning the fight. And I remember looking at this guy afterwards, and I thought I broke his nose. And I hated the feeling. Like you have the killer instinct. I'm a little different. I hated the feeling of beating this guy up. And I knew he got into the ring for the sport. But what I found about most, not all, but most fighters have a tremendous respect for each other, and they view it as a sport. Did you find that? Did you fight? I mean, when you got in the ring, did you tell yourself lies about this guy? Like he's the worst human in the world and I got to take his head off, or what was it like for you mentally competing against the top athletes?
He was standing in front of me. He was between me and my goal. So I didn't have to hate him. But yeah, I didn't make stuff up. And I've had to fight people that I've liked, and I do not perform well. I remember one fight I was in Atlanta, main event, and a guy come in, and because I'm originally from Tennessee. So when I was fighting, I was fighting in Atlanta from Tennessee, probably 90% of my career. And I remember that fight, and this guy come up to me, nice guy, great fighter out of North Carolina. And he knew I was a believer. And he goes, Tim, before we fight, he goes, do you mind if we pray together? And my coach was the coach down here in Atlanta, and he's like, no, hell no, no, I know what's going to happen if that happens. I'm like he asked me, I've got to do it now, so it's going to happen. And son, all the killer instinct in me ran out.
Man,
all of it. Yeah.
Because wow. And that it appealed to your faith, but then also you said this is a like-minded, this is another believer. And then, you said that you liked them. Like you don't like fighting guys that you like. So instantly you like them. If you could go back over again, I mean, it seems like you're a man of principle and that's why you decided to pray with them. If you could go back over again, would you change it? Would you do something different or are you okay taking that
I'd have
loss?
stayed in my locker room so I wouldn't have got asked.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. How has your faith played into fighting but not only fighting, your role as a businessman now?
A lot. I mean, it's, you've got to believe in something. And I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I've been that way. I was raised that way. I was in church the whole time I was growing up. Like we went to church 3 days a week. We beat the preacher to church. Like it was a non-negotiable at my house. And it's just some of the best people in the world that I've ever met are believers. And you have to have faith in something. And that's helped me through life, through my fighting, through my career. It's like, what are we fighting for, period? If you don't believe anything that's bigger than you.
So you grew up in a very Christian family. When you decided to start fighting and hurting people, how did your family respond to that? How did you feel like that was a response to your faith?
I started at 6 years old fighting. Like that was who I was. I didn't choose to fight. Like I was just that guy. Like I wanted to fight. All I wanted to do is watch the TV, watch them fight, train to fight. Like that's just.
But when you say fight, it wasn't like you weren't starting fights at school. You were training and doing it. You were doing it, sanctioned fighting. It wasn't stirring up fights.
I didn't stir them up, but I didn't turn them down either. I got in quite a bit of trouble growing up, so I wouldn't say no to something. And I felt like I was everybody's protector too. Like if me and you were out somewhere and somebody said something to you, and I thought they needed their head busted, I would arrange that for them. Mm-hmm. And I grew out of that, of course, but then I didn't. But the people, it was a sport, and that's how it was looked. And I'm from East Tennessee. It's like if you've never drove through East Tennessee, like we're all rough people. Like that's what we do. We fight, and it was never frowned upon or looked down on.
Yeah. So, what was the transition then to get out of it? Did you immediately go from MMA to real estate?
It's pretty close. I'd had my biggest fight of my career. I'd fought in Nashville, Tennessee. It was on Strike Force. It was the first nationally televised fight that wasn't pay-per-view on that event. And that event happened. And I've had one more fight. They called me and they're like, "Hey, Tim, we want you to come to New Mexico. We want you to fight this guy." This time the guy I was fighting was like 45. He had like a 10-10 record. Literally no, on paper, should not have been in the ring with me. 100%. And I'm like, okay, I'll come out there, and it's paying me really good money to fight. And for the last 2 years, I've been dealing with that's as far as my elbows will bend, and that's as far as they'll straighten. So I have restrictions that my body will not allow to fix.
Sure.
And I fought that guy. I come out, pieced him up a little bit on the feet. He threw a head kick. I blocked, broke these 2 fingers and down in my hand. Man. And I felt it the second it happened. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get him the ground, submitting, get out here at the W. I come in, shot in a double leg, grabbed me in a guillotine, like a little 3rd grade guillotine. Wasn't a good guillotine, wasn't a clean guillotine. It was something I've escaped 10 million times. Yeah. And I went to grab it, and the only fingers I could get in there was the broke ones because my elbows wouldn't bend. And he submitted me, and good job. But it was just like, it's my body not letting me. Yeah. And I was like, I'm done. I was in the ring, and my coach come up and he's like, "You good?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm done." And he goes, "Retire on top." He goes, "Why not?" I'm like, "Okay." And then I already owned a gym. Me and my wife owned an MMA gym where I taught still. Okay. And so I come in, I was teaching, and I had several realtors come in there, and it was just like, and I saw things in them, and I saw things they had and they didn't have that I had and I didn't. And I'm like, I think I'd be great at this. And so I remember texting my wife, and I'm like, I'm going to sell real estate. So that was a catalyst, is you were actually training realtors in your gym. Yes. That was the big thing that triggered, because I wanted to be in sales. I didn't want to cap on what I've made. I've managed gyms, I've managed detention centers, I've worked in warehouses. I did it all, and none of it was very profitable. And I was tired of that. I was like, I don't want to cap on what I can make. I want to be in sales. And I remember texting my wife and I'm like, I'm going to sell real estate. And she goes, do you think you can sell real estate? And I was like, I don't know, but I can outwork them. And she goes, you will definitely outwork them. Like that was our conversation. Like, you will outwork them. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do then. And that was about 10 years ago. So.
Wow. So it's definitely worked out.
Yes, sir.
You have a light in the background for those of you who are listening and not watching. It says, who you work with matters. And it's big and bold, and it's you can't miss it. So that is apparently very important to you. What does that mean to you?
That's the slogan that my team has adopted. And we have 3 teams. I've got a team in South Atlanta. I've got a team in Northeast Tennessee, and now I have a team in around Tampa area in Florida. And it's who you work with matters. It's like you can choose. Every person we know probably knows a half dozen agents, but 95% of those half dozen agents, they don't stay up on the trends. They don't know how to market. They're not practicing. They're not studying. They're not making it a craft. So yes, you have opportunities, but who you work with matters. Like it's going to, when we get into a negotiating, you're going to, like I told a person a while back, I'm like, well, I know so many agents. I'm like, here's what's going to happen. I said, you're going to be at the closing table negotiating, or you're going to be negotiating. I'm going to be with you or against you. Which one would you rather that be? And they're like, and that was a big eye opening. They're like, well, I'd much rather be with you. I said, you know so much, you study this, you learn, you educate everybody. And it's like, it's who you work with matters, because it's the biggest selling and buying decision you're going to make, unless you're selling businesses. It's huge. And you need to make sure that you understand that who you work with matters. It's not a choice that anybody can do it, because anybody may be able to do it, but the results are going to be far different.
Can you tell me the similarities to training people and fighting in your gym, and now you're training people in real estate? What are the, if you had to give like bullet points, like 3 or 4 lines that you've translated over to real estate that you literally have said in your gym when you're training people, what would those be?
I wrote a book about 3 years ago. It's called Forging Fire, 50 Fight to Win Tactics. I took 50 lessons that I learned from either fighting or growing up really poor, and how I've used them into the business. And so it's a great question, because I've been through that. One of the big ones I tell people is like, the harder your situation you've come from, the more potential you have for success. I've had my agents that come in that have come from nothing turn into incredible agents. They're coachable. They're willing to learn, and they want so much more. And they're really, really willing to work for it. And same thing with fighters. My fighters who come in, who are already comfortable, they're already eating steak once or twice a week. They've got a good family. They're not going to work near as hard as a guy who can't even go to the McDonald's on the dollar menu. Like that wants something out of life. Like that's a big indicator of success for me. So you can't teach tough, and that's in the real estate market, and that's in the ring either. Like you can't teach that. Well,
let me ask you something about that though. Let's say someone, because I've often thought that, hey, someone who grew up on the streets, they have so much more to fight for. They're fighting for their lives, versus someone who may have had life handed to them. And sometimes people, we get, prejudice towards people who had a little bit easier life because maybe it was easier than the life that we had. And we kind of condemn them for that, but people can't control their upbringing. They can't control having a happy home life, and their parents had money and they had love in their family. How do you take someone like that and put them in the ring and give them the same aggression to fight as someone who's fighting for their lives? How can you get someone to win a fight that's coming off the street with everything handed to them?
It's different. It's not meaning they can't be successful in the ring, cage, or real estate. But it's different because the worse your upbringing, and it's bad. I had a great family. We were poor. We lived in an 800 square foot house. They were 4 brothers and 2 sisters and a mom and dad, 3 bedroom, 1 bath. Like that's how I grew up. All the love that you had. I never had anything new until I was old enough to work. Everything was a hand me down from my brother. So I only had to go up. And I know a lot of people that were successful, but just like with the harder you